Serious, sailors of Reddit, what is the most unexplainable thing you have witnessed out at sea? I was manning a 0.50 calories on my first cruise in the Persian Gulf. I stood 1 4-hour watch every day. And it was pretty monotonous. We saw plenty of Gulf wildlife, bright purple jellyfish, sea snakes, etc. But one day I saw a bloated cow carcass just floating in the water. We're 100 miles from shore, so it probably didn't float out. But the possibility existed. Until we saw the second one. Then the third. Then the fourth. And the fifth. At about 1,000 feet intervals. There were bloated cow carcasses forming a perfectly straight line that we followed for a pretty good while because we were also going that direction. Had to have been 2-3 dozen of them. There were some goats and dogs in there too. Maybe not supernatural or anything. But it was pretty ducking weird. Never seen anything like that before or since. Sailing off the coast of Florida in a submarine at periscope depth. We see a small fishing boat go by. The fishing boat slows down, and on the emergency frequency channel we hear in a very southern twang, "Is that a submarine? That must be a dang submarine." The man immediately strips completely naked and then displays his rear for all of us to see on the periscope. He slaps scissors a few times and then carries on with his day. During the night after leaving Djibouti, we noticed that a radar echo, probably a tanker, was behind us and was on a collision course. We changed direction almost unnoticeably. 1 degree every 5-10 minutes in order to not reveal we were aware of its presence. After 1 hour the echo radar was still straight behind us and getting closer. It was clear it was following us. So we let the tanker get closer and closer. Until it was at 100 meters behind us. Then we turned abruptly. Esquived. And navigate at full speed in the opposing direction. Since a tanker takes hours to do a complete turn, we were safe after that. We never saw it again. Why would this tanker followed us and wanted to harm us? We had absolutely no idea. At the time there was no pirate in the zone. Maybe it was a ghost tanker. 250 miles into the Gulf of Mexico on my dad's boat, 44 feet. We'd been out there a couple weeks. It was about 2 in the morning. Ocean was eerily glassy, nary a wave to be seen. When you're that far out, and it's that dark, and the seas are calm, it can be tough to tell when the sky stops and the horizon begins. The boat was equipped with a light beneath the diving board on the rear, aft, that illuminated maybe a 20-foot radius beneath and around the boat. I saw a black shadow beneath me, a silhouette of something large enough to dwarf the boat I stood on. Maybe it was the alcohol. But I don't recall feeling afraid, just curious. I stared at it while it shifted beneath the light for a solid few minutes. I sorta wished it would surface. But I guess part of me was glad that it didn't. It's not much. And it really could have been anything from a whale to a submarine. But it was still the strangest thing I can remember seeing. Edit, clarification. We were sailing south on Lake Michigan with iron ore to Burns Harbor. It was around 2 o'clock. A blip on the radar and another and on and then right past us without any lights or sound. The thing was, the object after calculating its velocity was confirmed to be moving just below 2,500 miles per hour. This was a freaky moment because we couldn't think of anything that could move that fast on or just above water. I've told this story before on here, but it's been a while. So here goes. While standing a lookout watch at night on a patrol somewhere in the middle of the Bering Sea, I saw a light appear on the horizon. The light rose until I could tell through the binoculars that it was clearly a circle of light, a glowing orb of some sort. It rose quickly and steadily and hung in the air, motionless from my perspective, for a short period of time. But long enough for me to report the sighting and for folks on the bridge to puzzle over it. Then a few minutes later, it dropped quickly and was gone for good. So, 2 things we knew. 1, it was over the water. The nearest land in that direction was so far that the damn thing would have had to have been the size of Connecticut if it had shot up from land. 2, the United States government didn't have a clue what it was, or had no interest in telling us. It was weird. I do not believe it was extraterrestrial or the result of anything supernatural. But it was weird. My family and I were out sailing in Croatia in a rental boat. There had been some pretty bad weather the week before our arrival, but we had fortunately avoided the storms. However, one fateful day when we were casually cruising along the coast, we started noticing things in the water. We decided to check it out and found large chunks of debris floating around, including a cabin door with a small orange life vest resting on top of it. We were shocked and stuck around the scene for about 30 minutes, listening for sounds and checking out the things we could fish up. After concluding that it looked like it had been in the water for quite some time, we determined at least a month or two, and after trying to call it over our radio, which turned out to not work, thanks rental boats, we decided to keep moving. But we couldn't quite shake off the feeling of dread after seeing that. The little orange life vest still haunts me. I'm not entirely sure what else we could have done since we had no way of communication with land and we were hours away from the nearest port. We have no idea what it was, what happened, or, well, anything else. I was on a 52-foot boat 20 miles off the coast of South Carolina at about 3 AM cruising at 25 kts when I was hit in the chest by someone large and alive. It knocked me clear of the helm and was stuck to my shirt. I was on the deck rolling around trying to get it off me in the dark. I got up, took my shirt off and stomped it until it stopped moving. I went down to the cabin to grab my flashlight and gun. When I got back to the helm, I finally was able to see what it was. A huge bat. Its wingspan was 2 feet and it was still very much alive. It sat there for a minute and then flew off. I was bleeding and had to get rabies shots when I got home. It was nothing strange but still unexplainable. Seeing the stars while in the middle of the Atlantic with all lights on board off and a new moon. I don't mean a few miles off the coast either, I mean the closest I was to land was probably 400-500 miles. With literally no light pollution, it is like you are seeing one of those long exposure pics, but it's just something unreal. I live in Bermuda. About 10 years ago, our one and only power generating plant had a massive fire, plunging the whole island into blackout. That meant that other than the faint glow of a burning power plant, there were no lights within 700 miles of us. The skies were perfectly clear and there was no moon. It was like standing in outer space. The stars and sky were so visible. It was a special experience. My great-grandpa was a frogman, predecessor to the Navy SEALs and EOD, in the US Navy during World War II, and he claimed one day when he was on the deck of a ship before a mission, and he claimed that for a moment he saw thousands of hands reaching out of the water. A few hours later, while he was on shore, the ship was attacked and lots of sailors on the ship died. He didn't believe in visions and he always said it was because of the stress of running missions non-stop for the last month, but the rest of my family thinks he saw a few hours into the future. This will be buried, but whatever. Not me, but my father worked on an oil rig offshore in the Gulf of Mexico in the 80s. He said that on a couple of occasions he would see schools of barracuda making very strange and different but perfect shapes in the water. Shapes such as triangles, squares, rectangles, and even circles. He is an avid documentary watcher and says he's never seen anyone acknowledge or talk about it. No one will see this, so I'll just tell more of a light-hearted story. I'm sure you have heard of a flying fish before. I had too. I always thought that it was just like a misnomer. I thought maybe they just jumped really high so people thought they were flying. That notion shattered while boating around Destin, Florida, out in the Gulf, while traveling pretty dang fast on our fishing boat. I was amazed when my dad pointed out that there was a little flying fish keeping paces with us a few inches above the water. We were going pretty dang fast too. It hovered there for about a minute and then pulled ahead and dropped back into the ocean. Amazing little things. Not sure if this qualifies, but in school when I was 14 I was sailing on Carniston Lake in a 2-man sailboat. I was driving, and it was extremely choppy. We were going way too fast and I knew it was only a matter of time until we sank. The waves were terrifying, and I am not a fan of the water. In fact, I refused to go in a boat in an ocean outright. I was keeping it together for a while. But then I heard what sounded like an explosion. And a shock wave hit our boat, which turned the sail quickly, hitting me on the head. Time felt like it was slowing at this point. And my mate jumped straight off, and as I regained my senses I noticed that the boat was tipping a lot. It was about to capsize. I tried my best to turn it back the other way to level it out. But it tipped so much the sail touched the water and scooped it in, flinging me into the air, luckily away from the boat, because if I was under it I probably would have been killed. I surfaced and we held onto the edge of the capsized boat until help came about 20 minutes later. The wind was so strong, however, that the rescue boat almost sank as well, and we had to shovel water out of it as we went with paper coffee cups. Later I found out that a jet plane was doing maneuvers in the valley, and due to the poor visibility he went too low towards the lake and accelerated to pull away upwards, causing him to break the sound barrier at low altitude, which was what the explosion sound was. While serving the Persian Gulf aboard a destroyer, we were cruising our patrol zone on a clear calm day. No land in sight. We saw a water spout. No clouds or any other weather disturbances. It towered into the sky and didn't really move, but lasted for about 15 minutes then just dissipated. I once watched water spout churn for about 20 minutes, long enough for me to play from 7th green to 10th fairway. It was at the edge of a front of dark clouds, reaching from the edge of the clouds to the ocean. Beyond the front was clear sky, but where I was it was ominously black beneath a darkened sky. One of those thunderstorm turns day to night kind of skies. The sun was obscured by the clouds, but the water spout, being at the front, was backlit by the sun. The water spout and the spray at the base was lit up like some kind of fantastic Christmas decoration, almost otherworldly in its brilliance. It was an amazing, memorable sight. I took my boat out with my buddy. We headed out to Catalina Island. At about 6:30 in the morning, 15 miles offshore or so, we see a giant green flash come down from the sky in front of us. It was pretty big and bright in the sky and lasted for about 2 seconds and then it was gone. There's a military base on a different island further out, but it didn't look military. We've never seen anything like it before or since. In the South Pacific, I once saw a flash of green and purple erupt in the sky. I figured it was natural, but a few guys freaked out. I've answered this before, but the stars. When you're 3 days from the nearest land, and it's a clear night, more stars than you could ever imagined, and enough shooting stars to make you run out of wishes. I guess not unexplainable, but still really cool. I was once aboard a ship in Alaska which rammed a whale. Ship didn't even bump. We just cruised past it. Third-hand story from my time in the Coast Guard. Bit of a heartbreaker, so skip if you don't want the onions. Back before getting updated in the late 80s and early 90s, Fram. USCG Hamilton class cutters ACA 378s had Navy armament, 538 main gun, torpedo tubes, and sonar. I talked with an old sonar tech who had been stationed on his first tour as in Street Ike. While patrolling in the Pacific, they hit a baby whale cruising next to its mom. They had been going at a good clip, so they couldn't slow down fast. Chunks of whale got flung up on the flight deck from the props. The sonar shack had to listen to the death of the baby whale and the cries of its mom. It messed up the crew for a while, especially the sonar guys. Yes, my favorite question. I've posted this before. But on a Navy ship in the Bahamas at night, we almost got hit by a water spout. Came within about 20 yards. We couldn't do any maneuvering because of water depth. And then there was a moonbow, when the moon is so full and bright that it makes a grayscale rainbow. It was beautiful and I tried to get a photo of it, but of course I didn't have proper camera equipment. My father was a subsea engineer. He had numerous tales about finding strange debris on the ocean floor. His most interesting story was from a trench inspection for a new pipeline. He was on board the submersible as it followed the freshly dug trench and they videoed the site. Suddenly the pilot spotted something, slowed the sub, and shut down all the video equipment. He moved the sub to bring the lights on the skeletal remains of a human that had been clearly wrapped in chains. They hung there for a while in quiet observation. Then my dad asked the pilot, "Why did you shut down the video?" He replied, "Unless you want this entire project to be halted while a criminal investigation into the death of some stranger who likely died over 100 years ago. Best to leave what we have found down here and move on." Lazily sailing on a bright, sunny SoCal day. Light winds. No chop. Just wavelets and swells. Lost a wooden push broom off the stern of the sailboat. Saw it go over and start to float away. Glanced down at my feet. Glanced up and it was gone. It had instantaneously turned invisible. It most certainly did not sink, but though I thoroughly scanned the only area it could possibly be floating in, as my buddy brought us around in our tracks, it was nowhere to be found. Just gone. It really struck home the importance of man overboard drills, and 1. Not taking your eyes off the person for even a fraction of a moment. And 2. Physically point at them with your arm extended until they're rescued. Because floating objects really do disappear that fast. I have a good friend who I have been sailing with for years. I have a few stories with each of us, but my favorite is the story of how we met from his perspective. I was sailing off the coast of Washington just minding my own business when I see a mast sailing past me. Assuming I had just drank something that was messing with my head, so I peer over to take a look. And I see this fellow standing on the boom leaning against the mast with the deck completely below water. He just looks at me and says, "This looks worse than it is, but could you give me a lift?" And cracks this silly grin. In a hour-long story short, I gave this nut job and his flooded Zodiac lift back to port. So yeah, the strangest thing I think I have ever met on the ocean has been myself. Though I is a close contender. Submariner here. And not my story, but it came from a retired submariner I work with. It's also not unexplainable because, you know, like science and stuff. Anyways, he told me about how they had just surfaced off the coast of Florida and he was in the bridge as lookout. There had been a lot of storms there recently which caused the unique conditions necessary to create Street Elmo's fire. Turns out it's not just a movie, but actually something pretty interesting. Plasma in the atmosphere due to high electric potential differences. Definitely worth looking into for anyone interested. I'm currently on a car carrier with shitty satellite internet in the middle of the Pacific. I found this thread a bit late, but something pretty unexplainable happened a couple years ago. I was 500 miles off LA headed to Honolulu on a container ship when the intermediate shaft decided to shear itself from the propeller and fall into the ocean. You know, the bit that connects from the outside of the ship to the propeller? It happened right at the start of my morning watch on the engine room. I got my coffee, checked some gauges, and then heard a loud boom. RPM shot through the roof and I hit the all-call alarm. We shut down the turbines and waited a week before the company sent a harbor tug to tow us back home. No one could explain how the shaft just sheared off like that. Best guess was either incorrect loading or shitty installation in the shipyard. Either way, it wasn't supposed to happen. Since I'm seeing Navy stories here, I'll relay one myself. On a guided missile frigate returning from the First Gulf War, we were literally in the middle of the Atlantic when a contact was reported of the STBD bow. It was very rough too, so imagine our surprise when, as we drew closer, we could see a little, maybe 50 feet, sailboat. I mean, this was deep water, middle of the ocean, and there's this little sailboat. The small vessel hails us and requests assistance. As we get closer, we can see a little old man and his dog. On the radio, he asks if we have any cigarettes we could part with as he had run out. That's it. That's all he wanted. Literal middle of ducking nowhere. Deep ocean. No land for thousands of miles. Old man wanted some smokes. Yeah. We gave him several cartons. Some ship's swag, shirts, hats, etc. and sent him on his way. I was a commercial fisherman, so I have spent some significant time at sea. The thing that always weirded me out was the way huge parts of humanity were always left on shore. As soon as they were out of sight of judgment, boats would mount an illegal and torturous device called the crucifier to tear the heads off fish, saving one humane cut with the knife. And they would shoot seagulls with pistols off the back of the boat, just for sport. Shit, I knew a guy who would attract pigeons with bait just so he could catch them, grab them by the head, and spin their bodies until they flew off of the head in his hand, spilling blood everywhere to the laughter of his shipmates. The weirdest thing about the sea is what isolation does to human beings. Sailing in the Gulf Islands of British Columbia. Doing our best to stay away from the Navy, they were running a cat and mouse type exercise at the time. Anyhow, we're sailing up towards our anchorage for the night. And coming towards us is this orange ball boy. The strange thing was that the boy was moving. And was moving against current and wind. Despite the Navy ships that were playing hide and seek with each other in the islands. There wasn't any around us at that point. Nor were there any other boats. My best explanation is that it was attached to an underwater autonomous vehicle or similar.